Prabhupada Paramahamsa. Parivra Jakaracharya Ashto Taraslata Shishi Maj, His Divine Grace of High Charanada in the Bhakti Swami Prabhupada Ki. ISKCON, BBD Pandacharya, savor the whole world Srila Prabhupada Ki. Jayanita Vishnu Vishnu Pada Paramahamsa, Parivra Jakaracharya. Ashto Taraslata Shishi Maj, His Divine Grace of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Ki. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Ki. Nama Charya Shara Dastakur Ki. Premzakho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Jati Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Govardhana Shamakund Radha Kundgiri Govardhana Ki. Braj Bhumi Shivandavanama Ki. Navadip Maya Purnama Ki. Prushnam Chachara Jagani Purnama Ki. Ganga Maya Ki. Jamuna Maya Ki. Bhakti Devi Ki. Tulasi Maharani Ki. Sama Vaita Bhaktivinoda Ki. Jai Nitai Goparimandi. All glory to some glories, all 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 glories, Shri Guru and Shri Ranga, all glories to Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Pulakodvina Sarvango. Pulakodvina Sarvango. Pulakodvina Sarvango. Munchan Milad Dvisha Sucha. Munchan Milad Dvisha Sucha. Munchan Milad Dvisha Sucha. Pulakbina Sarvango. Munchan Milad Dvisha Sucha. Purnato Lakshitas Tena. Purnato Lakshitas Tena. Purnato Lakshitas Tena. Sneha Prasara Sampluta. Sneha Prasara Sampluta. Sneha Prasara Sampluta. Purnato Lakshitastena. Sneha Prasara Sampluta. Pulakod Sarvango. Munchan Milad Dvisha Sucha. Purnato Lakshitastena. Sneha Prasara Sampluta. Pulakodvina Sarvango. Munchan Milad Dvisha Sucha. Purnato Lakshitastena. Sneha Prasara Sampluta. Pulak Udbina. Bodily changes of transcendental ecstasy. Sarvanga. Every part of the body. Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur, he defines these two words as meaning that Uddhava was experiencing ecstatic eruptions all over his body. His hair was standing on end, he was becoming stunned, his tears were coming from his eyes, just all these, the eight, what was it called, the Sattvika bhavas were manifesting from his body. Munchan, smearing. Milat, opening. Drisha, by the eyes. Sucha, tears of grief. Purna Artha, complete achievement. Lakshita, observed. Oh, sorry, thus observed. Tena, by Vidura. Sneha prasada, extensive love. Sampluta, thoroughly assimilated. Translation. It was so observed by Vidura that Uddhava had all the transcendental bodily changes due to total ecstasy, and he was trying to wipe away the tears of separation from his eyes. Thus Vidura could understand that Uddhava had completely assimilated extensive love for the Lord. Responsively, please. It was so observed by Vidura that Uddhava had all the transcendental bodily changes due to total ecstasy, and he was trying to wipe away the tears of separation from his eyes. Thus Vidura could understand that Uddhava had completely assimilated extensive love for the Lord. So these verses 4, 5 and 6 are actually describing Uddhava's ecstatic manifestations that came about because of Vidura asking about Krishna. And this is a symptom of someone who's obviously very, very advanced in devotional service. That as soon as he hears about Krishna, even hears the name Krishna, he just goes into ecstasy. And there's an example Prabhupada would often give, is that when the mother sees something of the child, like the mother might see the child's shoes or something like that, then the mother becomes absorbed in thinking of the child. It's a similar kind of an idea. Purport. The symptoms of the highest order of devotional life were observed by Vidura, an experienced devotee of the Lord, and he confirmed Uddhava's perfectional stage of love of Godhead. Ecstatic bodily changes are manifested from the spiritual plane and are not artificial expressions developed by practice. What's Prabhupada referring to here? I'll read it again. Ecstatic bodily changes are manifested from the spiritual plane and are not artificial expressions developed by practice. Exactly, sahajas. And we see this is quite, I mean, I've seen it, particularly you'll see it in Vrindavan and Mayapur around Gorkanim time. You know, you come into the temple and there'll be someone like rolling backwards and forwards on the ground in front of you. And one time devotees, they mentioned this to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said, "Did you kick him?" You know, and then you would see, you know, the real manifestation, you know, whether they're actually absorbed in ecstatic symptoms or not. Because if you kick them and they're not absorbed in ecstatic symptoms, they'll react. But if they are absorbed in ecstatic symptoms, they'll just keep, you know, manifesting their ecstatic symptoms. So the people do practice to do these things in order to get followers. There are 3 different stages of development in devotional service. The first stage is that of following regular principles prescribed in the codes of devotional service. The second stage is that of assimilation and realization of the steady condition of devotional service. And the last stage is that of ecstasy, symptomized by transcendental bodily expression. The 9 different modes of devotional service, such as hearing, chanting, and remembering, are the beginning of the process. And this point is clearly made in the 7th canto, chapter 5, where that verse Shravan Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam is quoted. And it goes on to explain that these are actually the beginning stages of devotional service. By regular hearing of the glories and pastimes of the Lord, the impurities in the student's heart begin to be washed off. The more one is cleansed of impurities, the more one becomes fixed in devotional service. Gradually, the activities take the forms of steadiness, firm faith, taste, realization, and assimilation, one after another. These different stages of gradual development increase love of God to the highest stage, and in the highest stage there are still more symptoms such as affection, anger, and attachment, gradually rising in exceptional cases to the Mahabhava stage, which is generally not possible for the living entities. All these were manifested by Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the personification of love of Godhead. In the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu by Srila Rupa Goswami, the chief disciple of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, these transcendental symptoms displayed by pure devotees like Uddhava are systematically described. We have written a summary study of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu entitled The Nectar Devotion, and one may consult this book for more detailed information on the science of devotional service. So these 6 verses here are quite wonderful in describing, starting from the first verse right through to the 6th verse, describing Uddhava's qualities, basically, and how advanced he was in devotional service. And in the beginning, we see he's talking about from his childhood and then up to his old age, and we see in the very beginning he's talking about his activity. Verses 1 and 2 is talking about his activities as a child, and we see that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gives a bit more of explanation of it than what Prabhupada gives, that he actually fashioned a form of the Lord from, it doesn't say what materials, but he fashioned a form of the Lord himself, and he started to worship this form of the Lord. And he actually manufactured all his articles of worship and things like that. And we see that he was so absorbed in this worship of Krishna. Prabhupada describes he was playing with dolls, and this is just Prabhupada's way of describing something much, much deeper than just playing with dolls. Just like sometimes we'll see children, little girls and boys playing with Barbie dolls and Ken dolls and things like that, and they're making cups of tea for them, all this sort of stuff, It's not like that. Because we see that Uddhava, when his mother would call him to come and take prasad, if he was still engaged in serving the deity, he wouldn't come because he hadn't finished the worship. He was so absorbed. And we see similarities, and Prabhupada makes this point. I think it's in the second canto. I made a note of it here. Prabhupada says in the second canto, the life history of many such devotees is almost the same because there is always symmetry between the early lives of all great devotees of the Lord. So we can see, for instance, with someone like Uddhava, he's engaging in this, service, like some might interpret as play, but then in his purport, Prabhupada says that there's this service of transcendental realization. He actually had deep realization about Krishna. It wasn't he was just like playing with dolls and hopefully maybe in the future he'll become a great devotee. No, he was a great devotee from birth, an eternal associate of Krishna. And Prabhupada makes this point, as I say here in the second canto, chapter 3, that there's symmetry, there's always this symmetry in the lives of great devotees. And so we see with great souls, and Prabhupada also makes the same point here and in the second canto, that with Uddhava, because the second canto, 3rd chapter is describing the glories of Parikshit Maharaj. So we see in Parikshit Maharaj, he also used to imitate the worship of the family deity. Because the Pandavas were a family of great devotees, so naturally they would worship Krishna. So we see that Uddhava was also doing this, so Parikshit was also doing the same thing. And we also see in Srila Prabhupada's early life, he did the same thing. There's a beautiful story in the Lilamrita where Srila Prabhupada, he had heard about Lord Chaitanya's dancing in Rath Yatra in Puri. And at that time, all over Calcutta, there were Rath Yatras being observed by different devotees. And the Malik family, Prabhupada was connected with the Malik family, their Rath Yatra was the biggest in Calcutta. And they used to have 3 carts. They'd go out, they'd start in front of the Radha Govinda temple. They'd go down Harrison Road, which is the road that, I don't know what it's called. You know what it's called now, Chakra? They'd go down the road a little bit and come back to the temple. And so, young Abhay, Srila Prabhupada in his early days, was inspired by this, and he wanted to observe a Rath Yatra. So he convinced his father that, yes, I want to observe this Rath Yatra, and his father tried to arrange a cart for him. And they went to see a carpenter, and it was too expensive, he couldn't afford it. So, young Abai became very upset and he started to cry. He was only a child then, maybe 6, 7 years old. And he became very upset and started to cry. And so they're walking home and he's crying. And this old lady saw Prabhupada crying. And then went and asked, what's the matter? And he said, and his father explained, we tried to get a cart, we couldn't afford it, and etc. And the old lady says, I've got a cart, you can have. And so then they went and looked at the cart, it was the right size, it was still working, and so Gormahande, he purchased the cart, and they went home and they actually made it into a replica of one of the carts in Puri. They put the horses and the driver on the front, the columns and the 16 columns, and then made a canopy just like the carts in Puri. And then so what happened is when the occasion came, is Abai, he rallied all the children in the neighbourhood, and he even went and approached all the mothers in the neighbourhood and arranged them to cook, and the men were involved and things like that. And they observed this festival for 8 days. Now you can imagine, like, okay, a child might get involved in something like that, and they might do it one day for a little bit or something like that. We see, often we see with children, they become distracted very easily. But we see in Prabhupada's childhood that he observed this festival for 8 days continuous. And his enthusiasm was so fixed that he was able to inspire others. And we see that when we have the association of very advanced devotees. Their association inspires us in devotional service, so we want to surrender, we want to do more in devotional service. We've all had that experience. Whenever advanced devotees are visiting the temple, for instance, we're eager to try to do some service for them. We're eager to hear them speak. We're eager to hear their participate in the kirtan. This is when we have the sacred sound retreat here. There's a number of advanced devotees come, and they're giving very nice classes, they're nice kirtans, etc. And so there's so much eagerness to associate and to become enlivened with Krishna consciousness. So we see the same with this, Prabhupada's performance of Rath Yatra as a child, because of his transcendental realization. We can understand that Srila Prabhupada was not an ordinary person. He was a greatly advanced transcendentalist, even as a child. So because of his transcendental realization, he inspired others to also participate, and it turned out to be quite an event. And it was regular. Every year the same thing would happen. And so we see there's so much similarity. And Prabhupada also mentions in the second canto about devotees like Mirabai. Also the same similarities are there, that they're performing this devotional service based on transcendental realization. And it's not like they're playing with dolls. They're all doing deity worship. They're actually, they're engaged. And we see that, Prabhupada's father also bought him Radha Krishna deities, which eventually wound up on the altar in Mayapur. If you ever look at, if you're ever in Mayapur and you look at the altar, and you'll see where Madhava's staff, he's always got a staff. And at the base of Madhava's staff, you'll see an oval-shaped picture. And that's actually Prabhupada's deities that he worshipped as a child. And they were they were on the altar there in Mayapur for some time, but they got stolen. And there's the whole story there. But so there's a picture of those deities, the Prabhupada's deities that he had as a child, and they're being worshipped in Mayapur. But we see that in the lives of these great souls is when they take on this service to Krishna, this worship, they become completely absorbed, and they're directly serving Krishna. It's not like there's some kind of, even though Prabhupada mentions here about imitation, we can see how they're directly absorbed in this service of Krishna. And we also see there's many different examples in Prabhupada's life. There was one really nice pastime when Prabhupada was in London one time. He was actually really sick. He'd been in Calcutta, and he got blood dysentery. Pishima, his sister, had cooked some kachoris for him, and they weren't properly cooked, and Prabhupada became really sick. But then he was hearing reports about the festival that was planned in London, so he went to London. He went to London and participated in the Rath Yatra, and even though even though he was still somewhat ill, we see that he was so inspired by the arrangements for the festival, and because has anyone ever been to the London Rath Yatra? It's quite impressive. It's quite impressive Rath Yatra. It goes down some of the bigger, the busiest streets in the world, and huge chariots, and it winds up in Trafalgar Square. It's like they start at Hyde Park Corner and they go down Park Lane and through Mayfair and all these different places. It's just like being on the Monopoly board, And anyhow, so Prabhupada was quite inspired. So they'd actually arranged a nice vyasasana on one of the chariots for Prabhupada, and I think it was on Subhadra's chariot. Actually, no, they only had one chariot. So they arranged for a vyasasana on the chariot, and then they were guiding Prabhupada to the chariot, and then he said, "No, I'm only a devotee. I'll walk." And so Prabhupada, for the whole procession, he was dancing and chanting and gazing lovingly upon the deities, and he was inspiring the devotees so much, even though he was so-called unwell. And this leads to this point that Prabhupada's making here in this purport, where he's saying that ecstatic bodily changes are manifested from the spiritual plane and are not artificial expressions developed by practice. So we can see that when a devotee who's advanced in Krishna consciousness, and we're talking about like serious advancement, like someone who's really, really advanced, that when they hear about Krishna, or when there's some udipana, some stimulus that reminds them of Krishna, they develop ecstatic symptoms. And we see here, this is what's happening with Uddhava, is Vidura has asked him about Krishna, what's happened, because Vidura's, he's in quite a state, he's a bit kind of, overwhelmed with grief because he's understood the Pandavas, the Yadavas have all gone. They're all returned back to the spiritual realm. And I mean, Uddhava knew this because Krishna told him he was going to wind up his pastime, so he told him to go and meet with, I forgot where he told him to go. And he told him, I think he went to go north and prepare to depart. Anyhow, so Uddhava was also somewhat distressed. But when Vidura asked him about Krishna, just hearing Krishna's name, he started to manifest ecstatic symptoms, and he became stunned. And in one of these verses here, I think it might be the previous verse, maybe it's one before, yeah, it's the fourth verse, he says, Sa Mahurta Mabhuttishnim. So Mahurta, how long is a Mahurta? Huh? Yeah, there's 30 minutes, 40 minutes, there's various times given. My understanding is it changes depending on the time of year, but it's about 40, Vishnu Chakrabarti Thakur says 48 minutes. So, Prabhupada says here for a moment, but actually he remained stunned for quite a long time. For 48 minutes actually. And he was just absorbed in this ecstasy of thinking of Krishna. And these are what they call sattvic abhavas. And there's two types. There's what's called anubhava and there's sattvic abhava. So anubhava are things that like one's inspired. It's just like you come to the kirtan and you think, oh, this is such a nice kirtan. Oh, I think I might dance. This is like an anubhava. It's like something you consciously decide to do in service to Krishna. But a sattvic abhava, this is involuntary. You don't decide, well, I'm going to become stunned for 48 minutes. And so this is what Uddhava was experiencing. He became completely stunned, and he couldn't function. He stopped the ability to be able to function in any way. A similar pastime happened with Srila Prabhupada I think it was somewhere in California, whether it was Los Angeles, San Francisco, I don't remember. But anyhow, Prabhupada finished the class, and Govinda Dasi had this question she wanted to know about, but it wasn't related to the class, and she was feeling a little bit reluctant. She didn't want to ask the question, but then eventually she did ask the question, and so Prabhupada said, any questions? Govinda Dasi she asked Prabhupada about you've mentioned that Lord Chaitanya, in Puri sometimes he would fall in the ocean and become overwhelmed and like that. And then so Prabhupada, he was very happy with the question, even though it wasn't connected with the class. He was very happy with the question, and he started to explain. And then he started to, he just went into this like ecstasy, and he couldn't talk, he couldn't function. And then he closed his eyes, and he sat like that for some time. And then when he opened his eyes, devotees could see his eyes were full of tears. So he was starting to involuntarily manifest these ecstatic symptoms. So, and we see this is, again, like Prabhupada's saying, there's symmetry in the lives of all great devotees. And we see, you read any of these discussions about great devotees, and we'll see they all manifest these various ecstatic symptoms at various times, particularly when they're reminded of Krishna. And you know, Uddhava was quite an extraordinary personality. He was almost the same age as Krishna. His bodily symptoms almost exactly resemble Krishna. So much so that when he went to Vrindavan as a messenger, Krishna sent him to Vrindavan as a messenger to the gopis. The gopis actually thought he was Krishna at first, when they first saw him, because he resembles Krishna. And not only that, he's Krishna's dearmost friend. Very, very close, very intimate friend of Krishna's. And we see here that if you look in the Nectar Devotion, I've got a book here I was going to read a few extracts from. But in the Nectar Devotion, Srila Prabhupada, he describes Sattvika Bhava as existential ecstatic love. And Rupa Goswami, he uses the term Sattvika Bhava. And the Sattvika in this sense doesn't refer, because it's called Sattvika, meaning of goodness. It doesn't actually mean the mundane goodness. It means Shuddha Sattva or you know, it's a manifestation of Krishna's internal potency. So when the devotee comes into contact in a deep way with Krishna's internal potency, then this manifests, it comes out, and they get eruptions of love and various symptoms. And I'll just read some of these things, notes I've taken here. It occurs when one's heightened affection overrides the intelligence, because usually, you know, like the way we conduct ourselves, the way we dress, things like that, this is governed by our intelligence. You know, like a devotee's intelligence, you dress in a modest way, you dress in a chaste way, you act in a modest, chaste way, all these types of things. But when one's you know, kind of what would you say, your affection for Krishna is so great that it overrides your intelligence. And we see this is particularly prominent in the residents of Vrindavan. Just like, you know, one example might be there is in the evening sometimes Krishna would go to the forest and he'd play his flute, and the gopis would hear that. And they become so overwhelmed by affection for Krishna that they wouldn't dress themselves properly, or they put their choli on upside down, or things like that. They just get confused, but you know, they just completely override their intelligence. And so this is, you know, it's not something you can pretend to do. You know, we see when one has these manifestations of Sattvika Bhava, it's involuntary. These things just naturally happen. That you have no control over them. And it's important to understand these things, especially if you ever plan to go to India, because you'll see so many times, you'll see people, like if you go to Mayapur during Gaurapanim, you get all these, you've seen them so many times, right, the owls and the bowels, they come and they do all these kirtans. And like these guys have got tears coming out of their eyes and all this stuff. And when they finish the kirtan, they go have smoko. You know, they have a beedi or whatever, or drink chai and stuff. So you can see, obviously, these are symptoms they've practiced to develop. They're not actually ecstatic symptoms at all. It's just a show. It's just a theatrical show in order to impress people into thinking that they're greatly advanced devotees. And I won't go into all the details of why they do these things, but it's pretty degraded what they do. You know. So, you know, by understanding the manifestations of ecstatic symptoms, then when we come across people like this, we can understand, actually, oh, these people aren't that advanced. They're actually pretending to be something they're not. And there's 8. When one manifests Sattvika Bhava, there's 8 different symptoms. So this is what. Actually, I'll ask you at the end. Right. First one is called stamba, which means stunned. Right. The second one is sweda, means they sweat, perspiration. Yeah. Then romancha. What's romancha mean? Romancha kampasru taranga bhajo. Yeah, the hair standing on end. Yeah. And then swara bheda, means faltering voice, means you can't speak properly. And we see Mahaprabhu, when he was dancing in front of Jagannath, he was manifesting this. He couldn't even say Jagannath. He was trying to say it, but he couldn't because of ecstatic symptoms. Kampa means trembling, body shaking. You can't stop it. Uncontrollable. You can't stop your body from shaking. And then Vaivarnya means changing colour. The colour actually changes. We see sometimes Radharani, this happens with Radharani. Or even we see Lord Chaitanya. There's a beautiful place in Vrindavan called Imlital. Actually, I remember a number of years ago I was given a piece of Imlital wood. This is a tree where Krishna would sit and he'd meditate on Radharani, and he'd take on a blackish colour. And 5,000 years later, Lord Chaitanya used to sit on the tree and meditate under the tree and meditate upon Krishna, and he would take on a blackish colour. Krishna would go golden, and Mahaprabhu would go blackish. So this is changing colour. This is called Vaivarnya. And then Ashru, tears flowing from the eyes, just like torrents of rain. And then Pralaya. What does Pralaya mean? Devastation. You're completely devastated. So what symptoms was Uddhava manifesting? Primarily. Huh? Yeah, he was stunned. He was completely stunned. He couldn't function. Yeah? And then as we see, as he evolved, more and more symptoms started to manifest. So you can see, and this is the thing, devotional service is not just some emotional, sentimental kind of like whatever. It's very scientific. And we see in the Nectar of Devotion how Rupa Goswami has scientifically analysed all the symptoms of love. So you can understand, and we see also Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in his Madhurya Kadambini has also scientifically analysed the symptoms of love. So you can analyse someone else, but you can also analyse yourself. So you can see, am I making advancement? Where am I situated in devotional service? So very, very interesting discussion. And one of the things that's really interesting, I find very interesting, is that we'll see as the conversation evolves how Uddhava, even though he himself is overwhelmed by separation, still, in order to pacify Vidura, because Vidura was overwhelmed with grief because he's lost all his loved ones and Krishna, the Lord of his life, is gone. Still, Uddhava explains the philosophy of devotional service to pacify him. It's quite extraordinary, that even though he's completely overwhelmed, that he still takes the time to explain to Vidura. So these are some sections from Nectar Devotion. This is chapter 28, Nectar Devotion, which Prabhupada calls existential ecstatic love. As I was saying before, in Anubhav one experiences devotional, you experience ecstasy. And even like, we all experience devotional ecstasy. Don't think that this is something that's so high and far removed that you're not going to experience it. It's just like, when you're in a kirtan and you feel happy, you feel glad to be in the kirtan, you want to chant, you want to dance. This is devotional ecstasy. It may not be, sattvika bhava, but it's still some devotional ecstasy. It means you're getting satisfaction or pleasure from the devotional process. And this is what drives us all forward in devotional service, because we're experiencing some kind of bliss, we're experiencing some kind of devotional ecstasy. It may be very small, but it's still there, and it's driving us forward in devotional service, and that's what keeps us going to greater and greater heights. But then we see sattvika bhava, it's involuntary. It's when one's heightened affection overrides the intelligence and directly causes involuntary physical symptoms such as paralysis, standing of the hairs, perspiration, these 8 things I've just described before. They're involuntary and they just erupt. You can't stop it. So Prabhupada explains that when a devotee is always intensely affected by love for Krishna in a direct relationship with him, or even a little apart from him, his status is called existential ecstatic love, or sattvika bhava. Then there's 3 types of sattvika bhava. There's snigdha, digdha, and ruksha. So Snigdha, this is my understanding, Snigdha is considered to be the highest. This is what they call moist existential love. Then Mukhya is direct moist. Sorry, the Snigdha has two other categories. And I won't get too much into the detail, but there's all these different manifestations of ecstatic love. So each symptom has specific characteristics, and again, Rupa Goswami explains this in a very scientific way so that you can understand when someone is experiencing ecstatic symptoms, what the symptoms are. You know, you can't pretend. And we'll see, Prabhupada says, this symptom, stunned, is exhibited by stoppage of talking, a stoppage of movement, a feeling of voidness, and extreme feeling of separation. So this is exactly what Uddhava is experiencing, this extreme feeling of separation. So by analysis we can understand he's obviously a greatly advanced devotee. He's on the level of prema. Even though his relationship is dasya, he's still on the level of prema. Or we can see someone like Bhishma, his relationship was more shanta, but still he experienced prema. So in all the primary rasas you can experience prema. Yeah. Anyway, so it goes into an explanation of stamba, or this becoming stunned, and yeah, it's quite amazing. And there's just another little part I wanted to read, and this is from chapter 36, transcendental affection, servitude. So this was the relationship that Uddhava had. He was a servant of Krishna, and you know we can see that because just like you read in the Krishna book, at one point Uddhava went to Vrindavan as the messenger. So this is the sort of things a servant does. They're a messenger. They'll go and do things, or they'll fan Krishna, or they'll hold an umbrella over his head, or all different types of things like that. So this is Uddhava. He used to act as a messenger. And in the mood of dasya, the servitude, there's strong affection, or priti, love. There's strong love for Krishna. Yeah? And Prabhupada says, this affection is relished by the devotees in different transcendental tastes, and therefore the general name for this state is affection, or pure affection for Krishna. Then there's 4 types of servants, like you have the demigods, who are appointed to specific services in the material world. You have devotees who have taken shelter of the Lord's protection, and intimate ministers who render various personal services. So this is the category that Uddhava was in. He was an intimate minister, because he was in Dwarka. And then intimate followers of the Lord in Braja and Dwarka. This is the highest stage. And then Prabhupada explains devotees of the Lord in servitude are divided into 4 classes, and he gives those different classes. Then just a little bit of information about the category that Uddhava was in. And they're called the Parashadadasas. And they're Lord's ministers who perform intimate personal services appropriate to their particular situation, such as carrying messages, fanning the Lord, etc. And here's a quote from the Nectar of Devotion. And because Uddhava was one of the principal Parashadadasas. In the city of Dwarka, the following devotees are known as Krishna's close associates: Uddhava, Daruka, Satyaki, Shrutadev, Satrujit, Nanda, Upananda, and Bhadra. And among the Kuru dynasty, Bhishma, Maharaj Parikshit, and Vidura are also known as close associates of Lord Krishna. Yeah? And you know a bit about Uddhava's devotional mood again from the Nectar of Devotion. My dear Lord, your personal associates, headed by Uddhava, are always awaiting your order by standing at the entrance gate of Dwarka. They are mostly looking on with tears in their eyes, and in the enthusiasm of the service, they are not afraid even of the devastating fire generated by Lord Shiva. They are souls simply surrendered unto your lotus feet. So we can see here from these descriptions how, you know, even though Uddhava is in this mood of a servant, that he's always absorbed in this ecstatic love of Krishna, and he's just willing to do anything he can to satisfy the Lord. And hopefully one day we'll also achieve that situation where we're willing to do anything for Krishna's pleasure. And we see, you know, like even in these greatly advanced Vaishnavas, devotees, in Vrindavan, they were willing to give up any material position or any material recognition for the satisfaction of Krishna. And this is primarily demonstrated by the gopis of Vrindavan, whereby they were even willing to give up their standing in society, to be seen as respectable women and things like that, just for the pleasure of Krishna. So this is obviously something we aspire for, and it may take some time to get there, but the process of bhakti can deliver us to that position. Okay, any questions, comments at all? Yeah. Chaitanya Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. We were talking about the exhibition of ecstatic symptoms or coming into the state of trance or being stunned. Yesterday I was listening to a class and it was talking about a pastime of Srila Prabhupada, I believe in maybe Vrindavan, and chanting Jai Radha Madhava and falling into this stunned state for a while, and then the devotees after a minute, a couple of minutes didn't know what to do and started kirtan and then finally came back into external consciousness.
Yeah.
But apart afterwards, I heard this class was saying that one of the devotees came to Prabhupada's room afterwards and said, Prabhupada, what should we do when this happens? Is what would be correct, or can you tell us what should we do when this happens? And he apologized, saying, I'm sorry, this shouldn't, or this doesn't happen often. So it just, what you're saying, it's amazing to see all these displays exhibited by personalities like Uruwa, and then our Srila Prabhupada as well. But it's not like doing it as a show. It's like, I'm now going to exhibit ecstatic symptoms as a display, rather than it's so spontaneous and it's not what we're meant to do. It's just a byproduct.
And by that you can also see the difference between someone who's genuine and someone who's not. Because someone who's not genuine is doing it to impress someone. And you can see, obviously you can see when someone's trying to impress you, it doesn't take much to figure it out. And so if someone's manifesting various ecstatic symptoms or even performing devotional service to impress someone else, to gain followers, to get money, to whatever, you can understand that obviously they're not very advanced in devotional service. And even sometimes you might see, devotees in so-called, big positions who may not be that advanced, and they externally manifest various whatever to try to impress people. But these things, they can't last, they can't sustain it. And you'll see that in due course of time, these people have problems. Because it's what they call mityachara, is they're pretending. But then we see with someone on the level of Prabhupada, Uddhava, Pariksit Maharaj, all these great Vaishnavas, they manifest these ecstatic symptoms, but they have no control over it. And they as you say, with Prabhupada, they feel sort of almost embarrassed. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that, So, rather than pride coming out, this humility comes out. So, it's a vast difference between someone who's pretending and someone who is. So thank you for raising that point. But if you read the Leelamrita, you'll see many wonderful pastimes. There's even stories in Los Angeles how Prabhupada, same thing, Jai Radha Madhava, tears just like squirted out of his eyes like syringes, like we hear the description of Lord Chaitanya. And devotees have even mentioned how actually they got squirted with Prabhupada's tears. And this ashru, tears squirting out of the eyes. Not just like dripping down, it's like squirts. Physically, how can the body do that? It's not a material thing, it's transcendental. And that's the point that Prabhupada makes here in this purport. You can't practice these things. Let's see someone practice that, squirting tears out of their eyes. You can't practice that sort of stuff. Anything else? You can hear the song over there, right? Time to go. Okay. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki, Jai Nitai Gopal Manandi.